I will never forget the day that my son came home from school. He got off the bus and he was holding his head right here, and he kept saying, ouch, ouch, ouch. And when he got to the door, I asked him, I said, what happened? What's wrong? And all he said was, he went clunk on my head. Who went clunk on your head? What are you talking about? And when I asked him, he told me the person's name, he told me what happened, everything. And I was surprised. It was a behavior therapist who actually punched him on the top of his head, obviously with so much force that there was a huge lump in the center of his head that no one saw when they put him on the bus. Okay. So I looked through his book bag because, surely there had to be an incident report or something. But there was nothing. No incident report, no phone call from the school. I wanted to make sure his story was consistent. So at different intervals, I video recorded him and asked him the same questions over and over again. And nothing changed. So I believed him. He wasn't a child that made things up just to get someone in trouble. He was never wired like that. Matter of fact, if someone was telling a lie and he knew it, he's the type of child who would definitely call him out and say, hey, that's not true. But for adults who are professionals, who are trained in specific areas to help these children, that's just not acceptable by any means. I was devastated because I have a child with autism who had just learned to talk only 2 years prior. And thank God he was able to tell me what happened to him. According to statistics, persons with disabilities have a much higher risk of being abused. Here we are. I have a child with special needs, and fortunately he can talk. He was able to tell me everything that happened. This was the beginning of multiple cases of child abuse, not just at school, but in other settings. And this was really hard for me, and I know for him, because it got to a point where, when things would happen, he was so used to it that it became his norm. And no child should ever feel that abuse is their norm. So I go into detail about the stories and what happened in my book, talking about all the cases that went down. And I really encourage you to read this book because it is really amazing what goes on behind closed doors and what our children are possibly facing. This really hurt me in a way I can't even explain because this is my child, no child should ever have to fear going to school or fear being in a certain environment. And it's not okay. They should not think that that's okay. And I think he was beginning to think it was okay. I'm still not over it. And I don't think I'll ever get over it because this was my child. You hear these stories happening to people, but not my child. My child, he's verbal. He's going to tell on you. He'll tell me what happened. But that's when I realized that when you have a child who has autism, their story is not considered to be credible, which is really sad. Because what kind of message is that sending to the child who is trying to defend their self the only way they know how? And fortunately, he was able to tell me and speak to the authorities and tell them and give them a full story and nothing was done. So I felt broken. My child had gotten to a point where he was broken, and that's the worst feeling that any parent can ever go through. It's the worst. You have to have a really huge heart. You have to have a big heart to forgive someone who's done something like that. And I've forgiven the person, but this memory in my head, it just lingers and lingers because I can't get his face out of my mind when my child came home, and I just can't seem to get past it. I hope this helps somebody, because a lot of times we think that our child is in a safe place, and there's so much that goes on behind closed doors that parents don't know about. There's so much more to this story to tell you, God. But this was a really heavy one for me. And I carry this weight around with me, this hurt, this pain, that I'm praying that God will lift this burden, because this was a big one. It just was. No child should ever have to feel this way. No child should ever have to feel unsafe, should ever have to live in fear of being hurt. What happened to living like a child? What happened to childhood? And I feel like it stripped so much away from him. And it caused a lot of anxiety. It's traumatic. Child abuse is traumatic. It causes a lot of anxiety, not just in the parent, but the child. This was a very hard time, because knowing that this was not likely going to be the only time that this would happen to him was traumatic. And what made it even more traumatic was the fact that it did happen again in a different setting a few times. And his voice still wasn't heard. And what made the situation even worse was I was driving to another location that wasn't too far from the school, and my son was with me. And because we were a few blocks away from the school, my son thought I was going to take him back there. So he started screaming, "Mommy, Mommy, don't take me back. Don't take me back, please." And he tried to jump out of the car while I was driving. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes that parents aren't aware of. And truthfully, this has been one of the most devastating and traumatic events that I have faced in my life. To have a child that was abused and his story kicked under the rug as if it never happened. It happens all the time. It's not new. And that's why I wrote this book. From the bottom of my heart, I want to help families and children with special needs, because this struggle is real. This book is not just for people who have children with autism or who have been bullied. The magnitude of this journey was so major that when I was writing the book, I had to stop. Literally stop. And I'm not talking about just for a couple days. I mean, I had to literally stop for weeks, maybe a month or two at a time, especially when I got to the chapters talking about the abuse. Reliving the experience was incredibly painful and tearful, emotional. It was an emotional roller coaster like no other ride I have ever ridden. And I was compelled to tell this story because, you know, this is something that happens all the time. And for children who can't even speak up, who are nonverbal, gosh, my heart goes out to the nonverbal children, because my child has a voice and wasn't heard. Can you imagine a child who doesn't have a voice? An actual voice that can tell you what happened to them? My son has behavior challenges, and his behavior can be very overwhelming. But no child, I mean literally no child, deserves to be abused. I mean, he's at this particular school so that he can get the help that he needed. And the person who was in charge of behavior is the one who went clunk on his head, leaving a huge lump with his fist. I urge you to get this book. This book is not just for parents who have children with autism or parents who have children who have been bullied. The magnitude of this journey is so overwhelming. It is for literally everyone. Educators, social workers, behavior therapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, doctors, lawyers, police officers, you name it. I don't care what you do. This book is for you, because if you ever witness a child being abused, or if you ever witness any of the things that I talk about in this book, you can make a difference. My mission is to help children all across the world, not just children who have been abused, but children who have been bullied, and children who are going through issues that are unthinkable. You know, dealing with IEP meetings, dealing with so many things that have a huge impact on our children's livelihood and their future. One person can make a difference in a person's life. This book will bring awareness so that people from the outside looking in who don't have a clue as to what it's like to be in a situation with a child with special needs, or who has been bullied, or who's going through other issues at school. This book is for you. This book is for you. I promise you, it will open your eyes to a whole new world. And it's a front seat into my life. So I need your support in getting this message out to the world, because this story is one that must be read and it must be heard, because a change has got to take place for these children. There's a saying that there are two very important dates in a person's life. One is the day that you were born, and the second is the day that you realize why. This is my why.